The sun disappeared for 18 months. Not behind clouds, not due to an eclipse, it simply vanished. In 1816, global temperatures plummeted 3 degrees overnight, and humanity discovered what happens when the Earth freezes in the middle of summer. Snow in July in the Caribbean, frost killing crops. In August, rivers froze in India, in September in Egypt. 200,000 people died of starvation in Europe, 500,000 in Asia. In the United States, farmers ate their own horses to survive. In Switzerland, children hunted rats for soup. In Ireland, entire families lay down together to die because it was less painful than trying again. All because a volcano on the other side of the world exploded, and no one even knew volcanoes could do that. Mount Tambora in Indonesia spewed so much ash into the atmosphere that it blocked the sun. It created a natural nuclear winter, and you, accustomed to supermarkets and central heating, wouldn't even last the first 3 weeks, because when the world freezes and food runs out, the rules of civilization melt faster than snow, which should never have fallen. The rules of civilization melt faster than snow, but in 1815, no one imagined snow would be the problem. The world was celebrating, finally celebrating. Napoleon had been defeated at Waterloo in June. After 23 years of war, which killed 5 million people, Europe could breathe. Soldiers were returning home. Borders were reopening. Trade was resuming. It was supposed to be the beginning of a golden age. London was the capital of the world with 1 million inhabitants. Paris was rebuilding itself. Vienna was dancing waltzes in the imperial halls. New York was growing by 1,000 people a month. The Industrial Revolution was turning muscles into machines. Factories belching smoke were a symbol of progress, not pollution. But this optimistic world had an Achilles heel that no one realized. 95% of the world's population depended directly on agriculture. There were no supermarkets. There was no refrigeration, no rapid transportation of food. You ate what grew within a 50-kilometer radius or starved. The weather was a Swiss clock of predictability. March, prepare the land. April, plant. July, first harvest. October, main harvest. November, store for winter. This cycle hadn't changed in 1,000 years. Peasants in France planted wheat on the same dates as their great-great-grandfathers. Farmers in Pennsylvania followed almanacs passed down from father to son. A typical family of 6 needed 2 hectares, producing perfectly to survive a year, with no margin for error, no backup. The 1815 harvest had been normal. The granaries were adequate, not full. The reserves were calculated to last until the next harvest, nothing more. Thomas Jefferson wrote in December 1815, "I never saw such promising prospects for American agriculture." In France, the new King Louis XVI promised cheap bread for all. In Russia, the Czar Alexander planned agrarian reforms. In China, the emperor expected record harvests. The winter of 1815-16 was normal, cold but bearable. Snow fell where it should have, rained where it should have. Peasants sharpened tools, mended fences, and planned what to plant and where. Children counted the days until spring. Seeds were separated, fertilizers prepared. March 1816 arrived on time. The first birds migrated back. Flowers began to bloom. Farmers began plowing the land. Everything was exactly as it always had been. Then April arrived, and with it the impossible. Snow, but not just any snow. Black snow mixed with ash that no one knew where it came from. Snow in places that had never seen snow. Snow that wouldn't melt. Snow that killed everything it touched. The 1-year climate clock had broken, and with it everything else would break. That impossible April of black snow had a father, a fiery father, who was born on the other side of the world a year earlier and whom no one in Europe even knew existed. Mount Tambora, Sumbawa Island, Indonesia, April 10, 1815, 7 p.m. local time. The 4,300-meter mountain simply exploded. It didn't erupt. It exploded as if 24,000 Hiroshima bombs had detonated simultaneously. The ash column rose 43 kilometers. 43. Commercial airplanes fly at 10. This column pierced the stratosphere, and that changed everything. Because in the stratosphere, there's no rain to clean the air. The particles remain there circulating, blocking the sun for years. 150 kilometers of material were ejected. To visualize, imagine a box 50 kilometers long, 50 kilometers wide, and 60 kilometers high. Now fill it with pulverized rock. Now throw all of that into the atmosphere in 3 hours. The sound of the explosion was heard 2,600 kilometers away. In Sumatra, they thought it was cannon fire and sent troops to look for invading ships. The island of Sumbawa was in total darkness for 3 days. Noon seemed like midnight. 71,000 people died instantly. 10,000 were vaporized by the explosion. 30,000 by the 40-meter tsunami that followed. The rest starved to death because volcanic ash 1 meter thick covered all the crops within a 600-kilometer radius. But that was just the beginning. The heaviest ash fell locally. The medium-sized particles circulated around Asia. But the microscopic ones, the sulfur dioxide particles smaller than 1,000th of a millimeter, caught the jet stream and began traveling. Within 3 weeks, they reached India. Monsoons failed. Within 2 months, they reached China. Rivers dried up. Within 4 months, they crossed the Pacific. California recorded frosts in June. But it was when they reached Europe in March 1816 that all hell broke loose, because these particles do something diabolical. They reflect sunlight back into space before it warms the Earth. A blanket, on the other hand, instead of keeping heat in, blocks heat from entering. The average global temperature dropped 3 degrees Celsius, 3 degrees that turned summer into winter. Scientists at the time didn't understand. Some blamed sunspots, others said it was divine punishment. Benjamin Franklin had theorized in 1784 that volcanoes could affect the climate, but no one took it seriously. How an exploding mountain in Indonesia could freeze the Thames in London. Lord Byron, living the horror in Switzerland, wrote, "The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars wandered dark in eternal space." He thought it was the end of the world. And for 200,000 people who would die of hunger in the next 18 months, it was indeed. And for 200,000 people, the end began with signs that seemed like cruel jokes from nature. Signs so absurd that many thought they were going mad. March 1816 began promisingly. Farmers in New England plowed the land. Farmers in France planted the first seeds. Then on the 26th, the temperature plummeted 20 degrees in 6 hours. 20 degrees. Birds fell dead from the sky, frozen in mid-flight. April was schizophrenic. On the 12th, it was 30 degrees in Virginia. On the 13th, half a meter of snow fell. Cattle died of heat stroke. Dairy cows stopped producing milk permanently. Horses lay down and never got up again. Their bodies couldn't process such extreme changes. But it was May that showed something was deeply wrong with the planet. On the 15th, red snow fell in Italy, red as blood. Priests declared it a sign of the apocalypse. It was volcanic ash mixed with ice crystals, but no one knew. Entire villages fled, thinking it was blood rain. June destroyed any hope of normalcy. On the 6th, a blizzard in New York. June, snow in New York. Newspapers couldn't explain it. On the 8th, Geada killed every crop from New England to Virginia. In a single night, 3 months' work turned to mulch. Mary Shelley, trapped in a Swiss village, wrote in her diary, "They will never live like this. It is as if the sun had lost its power to warm. We go out in July wearing winter coats and still shiver." July 1816 was the coldest month ever recorded in the Northern Hemisphere. Lakes in Pennsylvania froze in the middle of July. Children skated where they should have been swimming. In Germany, grapes froze on the vines. In England, the wheat harvest yielded 20% of normal. 20%. August brought snow to the Caribbean. Snow in the Caribbean. In Cuba, slaves who had never seen ice woke up to find sugar plantations covered in white. They thought it was a plague from the gods. Haiti recorded temperatures of 2 degrees Celsius. Tropical plants died en masse. September froze rivers that never used to freeze. The Nile in Egypt had ice edges for the first time in recorded history. The Indian River stopped flowing in some stretches. Crocodiles died of cold. Hippos were found frozen in Africa. Farmers, they tried to plant again. Each attempt failed within days. Thomas Jefferson lost 90% of his crops at Monticello. He wrote, "I have never seen such a calamity. It is as if nature had forgotten the seasons." In October, when the great harvest should have been, there was nothing to harvest. Empty barns, dead fields, animals dying because there was no pasture, and true winter had not even begun. Panic set in when the math became clear. There was not enough food to last until 1817. And when this deadly math became clear, humanity discovered that hunger turns people into monsters faster than any curse. The price of wheat rose 400% in 3 months. 400. In May, a loaf of bread cost a day's wages. In August, it cost a week. In December, families sold generations of furniture for a sack of moldy flour. In Switzerland, Europe's richest country, armed groups attacked bakeries like armies attack fortresses. Zurich had to create a special militia just to protect ovens. In Lucerne, a baker was killed for trying to save bread for his family. They found him stabbed 23 times, once for each loaf he had hidden. Germany created official government recipes for emergency food. Grass soup, boiling grass for 6 hours until soft enough not to cut the throat. Sawdust bread, mixing 30% wood dust with 70% spoiled flour. Clay jelly, white clay mixed with ground bones to give it substance. Johann Berg, a farmer in Bavaria, left a diary. On June 30th, we ate the last horse. On July 15th, we killed the dog. On August 3rd, the children hunted rats in the barn. On August 20th, there were no more rats. In China, the situation was apocalyptic. Yunnan province lost 90% of its rice harvest. Parents sold their children for a handful of grain. Not metaphorically, but literally. Child markets sprang up in Kunming. 5-year-old girls for 3 kilos of rice, 8-year-old boys for 5 kilos. Le Jung, a local magistrate, recorded, "Mothers eat the placenta of newborns. Old men volunteer to die to save food. I saw a family of 7 decide by lottery who would be eaten first." Ireland, already poor, collapsed completely. Entire families lay together in mass graves waiting to die. Not for drama, but for economy. Dying together expended less energy than dying separately. Father Omley of Cork wrote, "I no longer have the strength for extreme unction. I bless entire graves at once." In the United States, westward migration became a desperate flight. 10,000 New England families abandoned 200-year-old farms. They ate oxen, horses, then dogs, cats, anything with protein. In Vermont, they found a family that had boiled and eaten their own leather shoes. The cruelest thing was the lottery of geography. Egypt had a normal harvest, as did South India. But without modern transportation, it was impossible to move food fast enough. While grain rotted in Alexandria, people ate corpses in Zurich. Mary Shelley, witnessing the horror, wrote Frankenstein that summer. Not coincidentally, she saw real monsters every day, humans transformed by hunger into unrecognizable creatures. Her literary monster was less frightening than the reality on the streets. And these unrecognizable creatures soon destroyed the last vestiges of social order. Because hunger doesn't just kill bodies, it kills entire civilizations from the inside out. The riots began in May in France, Lyon, Toulouse, Paris. These weren't political protests, they were pure animal rage. Crowds stormed warehouses, discovered them empty, and then burned them. If they couldn't eat, no one would. 203 riots documented in 100 European cities. 203. The French government sent troops, but hungry soldiers don't suppress the hungry, they join them. In Poitiers, an entire battalion deserted and looted its own barracks. The commander was found eaten, partially eaten. The soldiers didn't even wait for him to die completely. But hunger had an even worse twin sister, typhus. Weakened bodies huddled together in search of food, lacking hygiene. Typh killed 3 times more than starvation. Hospitals became slaughterhouses. In Zurich, bodies were thrown out of windows because there was no more room to stack them. Wilhelm Keller, a doctor in Augsburg, described it. They don't look human anymore. Skin stuck to the bones, hair falling out, loose teeth, but worst of all, the empty eyes, as if the soul had departed before the body. Cannibalism ceased to be taboo and became a form of survival, officially documented on 3 continents. In Switzerland, a woman was arrested selling pork that later analysis proved to be human. She had killed and dismembered 6 travelers. When asked why, he replied, "My children were hungry." Apocalyptic seas sprang up like fungi. In Bavaria, Johann Bengel convinced 300 people that the world would end on June 18th. They all killed themselves the day before to reach paradise unharmed. In England, Joanna Southcott claimed to be pregnant with the new Messiah at age 64. 20,000 people believed. Governments began to fall. The canton of Ensel, Switzerland, had 3 governments in 6 months, each overthrown for failing to produce food from scratch. In Germany, principalities declared war on each other over empty granaries. Borders closed, neighbors became enemies. Crime exploded grotesquely, but they weren't stealing money, they were stealing food. In Manchester, a man was killed for a potato. A potato. In Naples, they cut pieces of flesh from living people in the streets. The victim too weak to resist, the attacker too hungry to wait for death. Families fell apart. Parents abandoned children. Children killed parents. In Munich, a 9-year-old girl reported her own mother to the authorities for hiding bread. The reward: hidden bread. The mother was executed for embezzlement. Food prostitution became a pandemic. Noble women sold themselves for a bowl of soup. Children were offered up by their own parents. In Vienna, the term Brotnut was coined, meaning bread prostitute. Lord Byron, observing the collapse, wrote, "Civilization is 3 meals away from barbarism. Now we find it is less." And amid this barbarity, some discovered ways to survive that seemed impossible, not by luck, but by brutal adaptation that separated the living from the dead. In Germany, they published the Handbuch des Hunger, 200 pages of systematized despair. How to make leather soup: boil shoes for 12 hours. Add ash to break down the fibers. Season with grass. Nutrition? 0. But it fooled the stomach for a few hours. Bone bread. Grind the bones of any animal into a fine powder, mix with water and sawdust and bake. The calcium kept people going for a few more days. Bark tea: pine for vitamin C, willow for pain, oak for diarrhea, forest pharmacy for those who knew how to look. But some communities did something revolutionary. They cooperated instead of competing. In Ravensburg, they created a commune where everything was shared. 400 people survived by eating on a rotating basis. Each ate every other day. They lost half their weight, but no one died. In Switzerland, the village of Elm developed a macabre but effective system. The elderly voluntarily stopped eating so the young could survive. They called it Dörlerdienst, the last service. 37 elderly people died so 62 children could live. Migration became a mass survival strategy. 500,000 Europeans fled, not emigrated. They fled to Russia, where there was food, to America, where there was land, to anywhere other than that frozen hell. Joseph Kuller walked with his family 300 kilometers from Virton to Odessa. Of the 7 who set out, 3 arrived. He wrote, "We left a trail of dead, but the living kept walking, not out of courage or because they lacked the strength to stop." The Irish, who managed to escape to America, created the first large Irish communities in Boston and New York, not by choice, but out of desperation. They arrived skeletal, sick but alive, and created support networks that exist to this day. But the most unexpected invention was born of the famine of 1816, the bicycle. Karl Dry in Germany saw all the horses being eaten. No horses, no transportation. He invented the running machine, the ancestor of the bicycle: 2 wheels, human propulsion. He revolutionized transportation when there were no more animals. Communities that survived had 3 characteristics: iron discipline in distribution, brutal punishment for shippers, and a charismatic leader who maintained hope. Those that collapsed, every man for himself, and all died together. Economist Thomas Malthus visited the devastation and wrote, "Nature has its ways of balancing population with resources. Famine is only the cruelest of them, but even the survivors were not unscathed." Later studies showed children who starved in 1816 had a life expectancy 10 years shorter. The famine left a mark on the DNA that was passed on to descendants, and this mark on humanity's DNA created something no one could have predicted: the most bizarre and lasting cultural consequences a natural disaster has ever wrought. Mary Shelley didn't write Frankenstein by chance that dark summer. Trapped in the village of Odat with Lord Byron and Percy Shelley, without sunlight for weeks, surrounded by reports of cannibalism and death, she channeled the horror into literature. It seemed as if nature itself had become monstrous. She wrote her monster. It was born from the ice of 1816. Lord Byron wrote Darkness, poems about the end of the world which read like news reports. Cities were burned for firewood, houses leveled by brief fires. Men gathered around the flames to see each other once more. And it wasn't fiction, it was their window. John Polidori created the modern vampire right there in that village. The vampire, the first tale of its kind, was born while Europe metaphorically drank blood. Gothic literature exploded because reality had become too Gothic, but the most practical consequence was the bicycle. With all the horses eaten, Karl Dreiss invented his running machine in 1817. 2 wheels, handlebars, human propulsion. It seemed like a joke. It became a revolution. Within 10 years, every European city had hundreds of them. transportation that didn't need to be fueled. In America, something even more profound happened. Joseph Smith was 11 years old in Vermont when famine struck. His family lost everything and migrated west. Years later, he would found Mormonism, a religion obsessed with stockpiling food. To this day, Mormons maintain a year's supply. The trauma of 1816 codified into religious doctrine. The conquest of the American West accelerated by decades. 10,000 families fled ruined New England. They went to Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. Cities that now number millions were born from famine refugees. Chicago was a fort with 200 people in 1816. By 1820, it had 8,000 refugees from the year without a summer. J.W. Turner, the painter, became obsessed with the bizarre sunsets caused by volcanic ash, impossible reds, supernatural oranges, and previously unheard-of purples. He painted 200 paintings trying to capture those colors. Art historians call it Turner's Red Period. It was the tambora, reflected in an eye on canvas. But perhaps the most disturbing consequence, the science of climate change was born there. Luke Howard, a meteorologist, first connected volcanoes with global climate. Published in 1817, Natural Forces Can Alter the Planetary Climate. It was ridiculed. It would take 100 years for it to be taken seriously. The very idea of international humanitarian aid was born in 1816. For the first time, countries sent food to other countries in peace. The Russians sent wheat to Switzerland. Without historical precedent, the notion that global catastrophes require global responses was born. And this notion of global catastrophe that was born in 1816 should have prepared us. But 180 years later, we are infinitely more vulnerable than our starving ancestors. Because Tambora was not unique. It is only one of 70 volcanoes capable of volcanic winter. Yellowstone, sleeping so beasters, taking selfies, has a potential 1,000 times greater than Tambora. When it explodes, I don't know when it will block the sun for a decade without summer. Camp Flegrei in Italy is now swelling 3 centimeters per year. It seems small. Tambora swelled 5 centimeters before it exploded. When Camp Flegrei explodes, all of Europe, the Mediterranean, will be buried in ash. The rest will starve to death in the darkness that follows. Toba, Indonesia, nearly wiped out humanity 74,000 years ago. Only 2,000 humans remain alive, from billions today to 2,000 tomorrow. And Toba is showing signs of awakening. Tremors have increased 400% in 5 years. But here lies the real terror. In 1816, 90% of the population knew how to grow food. Today, less than 2%. In 1816, food came from 50 kilometers away. Today, your apple traveled 8,000 kilometers. Your wheat crossed 3 oceans. Our supply chain is a continental spider web. A volcano in Iceland grounds planes. No planes, no transport, no transport. Empty shelves in 72 hours. Supermarkets keep stock for 3 days. 3 days between you and starvation. Worse, seeds. In 1816, every farmer hoarded seeds. Today, seeds come from 3 global companies. If transportation stops, there's no way to plant. Even if we knew how to plant, which we don't, our agriculture is cocaine for plants, synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and artificial irrigation. Without these, the earth doesn't produce. And all of this depends on oil, which depends on ships that stop when volcanoes erupt. Water. In 1816, they drank from wells and rivers. Today, their water passes through 7 treatment plants, dozens of electric pumps, miles of piping. 1 month without maintenance and cholera returns, typhus returns and dysentery returns. Medicines, insulin for diabetics, a 30-day supply, antibiotics manufactured in China, antidepressants that 40 million Americans take, stop, and withdrawal syndrome kills within weeks. In 1816, there were no people dependent on industrial drugs or energy. Without oil, without electricity, we're back to 1816, but with 8 billion people who don't know how to live without energy. Their great-grandparents would survive. Do you know how to make fire without matches? Preserve food without a refrigerator? Find drinking water? Scientists, they calculated, if Yellowstone explodes tomorrow, 5 billion will die in 2 years. Not from the explosion. From hunger, from thirst, from cold, from extinct diseases that will return. From violence when food runs out. And the scariest thing could happen tomorrow. Literally tomorrow. Volcanoes don't give useful advance warning. Tambora gave 3 days. 3 days between normal and apocalypse. And now I'm going to ask you questions that could save your life. Answer mentally with brutal honesty. How many days' worth of food do you have at home right now? Not what's in the refrigerator. Food that doesn't require electricity. If the answer is less than 30 days, you would die in the first month. Do you know how to purify water without boiling? Identify edible plants, preserve meat without refrigeration, make a fire without matches. If you answered no to any of these, you wouldn't make it past the second month. Your neighbors, do you trust them when hunger strikes? Would they share food or break into your home? The truth is, you don't even know half of their names. In 1816, 200,000 people died with far more survival skills than you. They knew how to plant, hunt, and preserve. You know how to order food through an app. If this video made you realize how unprepared you are for when the next drum explodes, there's a video appearing on your screen right now that will make you even more alarmed. It's about the Black Death. But the important thing isn't the disease. It's how entire societies collapsed in weeks when normality ended. The similarities to today are terrifying. Comment below where you're watching from and how many days you could survive without a supermarket. I need to know how many are aware of our collective vulnerability. Spoiler, if you live in a big city, the answer is less than a week. And if you think this is paranoia, that it will never happen again, share this video with that person who prides themselves on being prepared, but only has 3 cans of tuna in the cupboard. Because when the sky darkens again, and it will, who do you think will knock on your door first? The subscribe button is pulsing down there like a red alert. Every week I show a historical disaster that could repeat itself tomorrow. Last week it was the horrors of the Spanish Inquisition, which continues to happen under different names. Next week I'll reveal how Rome, the Eternal Empire, fell in just 72 hours. 1816 was a rehearsal, a test that humanity nearly failed with primitive technology and a small population. Today we are 8 billion people dependent on systems as fragile as glass. Yellowstone had 3 tremors while you were watching this video. Camp Flegrei rose another 1 millimeters. Toba registered another thermal anomaly. The question isn't whether you'll survive the year without summer. The question is, what will you do today to have a chance when it arrives? Because unlike 1816, we were warned, and ignoring nature's warnings comes at a price. 200,000 people paid in 1816. How many will pay next time?